What would happen if the U.S. left the UN? Have you ever wondered what would happen if the United States decided to leave the United Nations? This question sparks a lot of debate, especially when looking at it from a Republican perspective focused on national security and American interests abroad. Let's break down the potential consequences of such a move. First, if the United States left the United Nations, it would regain complete control over its foreign policy. This means no longer being tied to United Nations mandates or resolutions. Republicans often argue that the United Nations can impose restrictions that clash with American priorities. Without these constraints, the U.S. could act more directly and unilaterally in defending its interests. Second, the United States would stop funding the United Nations and its various agencies. Currently, the U.S. is one of the largest financial contributors to the United Nations. Withdrawing could free up taxpayer money, which Republicans might argue could be better spent on domestic needs or enhancing the military. However, this would also mean losing influence within the United Nations and could weaken international cooperation on vital issues like peacekeeping and security. Third, leaving the United Nations could limit the United States' ability to shape global policies. The United Nations serves as a platform for the U.S. to lead coalitions and promote its values. Republicans who prioritize national sovereignty might see this as an acceptable trade-off if they believe the United Nations is ineffective or biased against American interests. Fourth, a departure from the United Nations could affect U.S. alliances. Many countries view the United Nations as a key forum for dialogue and conflict resolution. Leaving could strain relationships with allies who see the United Nations as essential for global stability. Republicans might argue that strong bilateral and regional alliances could replace the need for multilateral frameworks. Fifth, the United States would no longer participate in United Nations peacekeeping missions or international human rights bodies. This could lessen the U.S. role in promoting human rights worldwide. However, Republicans critical of the United Nations often point out that some bodies, like the United Nations Human Rights Council, have shown bias against U.S. allies. In practical terms, a U.S. exit from the United Nations would require reviewing many international agreements linked to the United Nations framework. It would send a strong message about prioritizing national sovereignty and skepticism towards multilateral institutions. From a Republican viewpoint, leaving the United Nations aligns with a strategy of putting American interests first. It could reduce what some see as undue influence from international organizations and allow for reallocating resources to strengthen national defense and domestic priorities. However, this decision also carries risks of reduced global influence and potential isolation in international affairs. Republicans would need to weigh these factors against the perceived benefits of operating independently on the world stage.